Hello netizens, and welcome to the RPG Fanatic show. The last review that I did was for World of Warcraft, and I called it Analyzing World of Warcraft, and a lot of people really seemed to like it when I critically dissected aspects of that game. So I've come up with a new format for the show, and we'll try it out in this episode and see if it works or not. I've said in the past that I don't really do rating systems. I don't like it because I think people pay too much attention to, is the game a 5, is it a 10, whatever. And there's really no system in place to judge how that grade was determined, just like whatever the reviewer thought, I think this game is a B+ because blah, and they were usually created a short summary in one of the magazines. It's not very long. And they don't really explain how they came up with that idea. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to grade parts of a game, like the sound design, or the music, or the narrative, the control, how good it is. And based upon those points that I've awarded to these categories, we add them all up together and see what it is out of 100. There's a total of 100 points. So I'll try out this new format. And it's going to be very simple. If I think that this section is done really well, like I really enjoyed the music, I give it a 10. If I think it's done okay, there's room for improvement, but it's still passable, I give it a 5. And if I think it's done poorly, I give it a 1. So let's dive right into this review for Final Fantasy XIII-2 and take a look. Final Fantasy XIII-2 is the newest title released in the long-standing Final Fantasy franchise from Square-Enix. A direct sequel to Final Fantasy XIII, the story takes place a few years after the end of that game, and features all the same characters, along with a few new ones. This time around, instead of controlling Lightning, you follow the story of her sister Sarah, who was imprisoned in Crystal during most of the events of the last game. Lightning has, seemingly, died during the last battle of the previous game, which is not how Sarah remembers things, or the player. Then one night while sleeping, Sarah sees a vision of Lightning in a strange land called Valhalla, doing battle against a mysterious stranger wielding nightmarish powers. During the battle, Lightning assists a man named Noel, who has been jumping through time to find a way to save mankind from going extinct in the far future. Lightning asks Noel to find Sarah and give her a Moogle named Mog, who can transform into a sword or a bow, and tells him that Sarah can set everything right. After jumping another gate and finding Sarah, who now realizes her dream was real and that Lightning is still alive but lost somewhere in time, the two set out to find her. Along the way, they come across previous friends from the first game, including Snow, who has seemingly become a willing Lasil, a servant of the antagonistic and godlike Falsil, in order to gain the ability to travel through time and also find Lightning. In addition to a more streamlined version of the paradigm system of Final Fantasy XIII, there was also a monster capturing element to combat, where defeated enemies can be looted and then brought into battle to fill the role of a third party member. Each monster belongs to a specific paradigm role that cannot be changed, but they have access to special abilities that neither Sarah or Noel can learn. Each monster also has their own unique limit break technique, the strength of which depends upon pressing the correct sequence of buttons in a system reminiscent of Sabin's moveset from Final Fantasy VI, or Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, or Zell from Final Fantasy VIII. I point this out because a few reviewers, clearly unfamiliar with the Final Fantasy series, have claimed they are QuickTime events, but the mechanic has appeared in many Final Fantasy games before, and I think it's improper to call them QuickTime events, since failure doesn't result in not dealing any damage, just not as much as you could have dealt. XIII-2 also features decision points that are not quite as complicated as dialogue trees found in other games, yet they do have a strong impact on the flow of the narrative you experience. Unlike the previous Final Fantasy titles, which may have had 1 or 2 alternate endings, Final Fantasy XIII-2 sports several multiple endings based on the decisions you make during the game. However, unlike the use of dialogue trees in a game like Fable or Dragon Age, the dialogue choices do not determine the morality of a character or their personality, but rather are several choices the character might have thought to ask or do after weighing the options. Both Sarah and Noel have fixed personalities determined by the authors, so what you are actually doing is deciding which questions they want to ask or what tactic they wish to use to resolve a problem. Now, despite having an overall high opinion of this title, the game does have a few problem areas, but we'll talk about that more in depth later. For now, let's start dissecting each piece of the game and see if it's a worthy purchase for you. The narrative. It has always been my belief that the Final Fantasy series has been intended to be a bridge between the medium of film, visual storytelling, and games. From the first game onward, I've always had that impression of the game wanting to be a well-structured movie, where you feel like you are telling the characters what to do. The previous title, Final Fantasy XIII, is probably the closest Square has come to realizing the fusion of interactive gameplay with carefully controlled cinema, and Final Fantasy XIII-2 delivers that same experience. Now I could sit here and narrate the whole story for you, but that would ruin the experience of playing the game for you. So instead, let's talk about themes. An old theme of many Final Fantasy games has been time. The first game featured time travel, and a paradox caused by time travel as a major plot device, as did Final Fantasy VIII. And some Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VI and VII, have included time skips in the narratives, where the world has changed substantially due to the actions of the protagonists and antagonists. So time as a theme is not new to the Final Fantasy series, though gameplay based around time travel is. And concerning games featuring time travel as an element of gameplay, the first one that comes to mind is Chrono Trigger, another classic Square game. So it is logical to compare the time travel system of Final Fantasy XIII-2 with Chrono Trigger. Unlike the use of time as a plot device in other kinds of media, a consistent theme with time in Square's games has been not to preserve the timeline against antagonists who would change it for their own selfish reasons, but to create a future more desirable to the protagonists, whose goals are always focused on the larger picture. In Chrono Trigger, this was to defeat Lavos, who was going to destroy the world sometime in the future. In Final Fantasy VIII, it was to defeat Ultimisia, who was screwing with the timeline to keep herself alive and rule the world as a tyrannical dictator. And in Final Fantasy XIII-2, it is to prevent humanity from going extinct, with the more personal goal for Sarah of finding her sister Lightning, who was lost somewhere in time. This viewpoint is consistent with the theme of the previous game, where the protagonists were fighting against their own fates, which was being cursed by a godlike creature to destroy their homeland, but die regardless of the outcome. Another consistent theme is selfless sacrifice. In all games, the protagonists feel obligated to interfere with the plans of the antagonists, who seek to bring ruin to others. The plans of the antagonists often do not directly interfere in the lives of the protagonists, such as in Chrono Trigger. Chrono, Marley, and Luca could have chosen to remain in their own timeline and not set out to change the fate of their world, which wouldn't have impacted their lives at all. This is consistent with Final Fantasy XIII-2. Although Sarah has her goal of finding her sister and Null has his goal of preventing humanity from going extinct, neither Null or Sarah need to involve themselves in the affairs of everyone they come across. Yet, they consistently set out to help locate lost townsfolk or find missing objects treasured by an NPC. They also spend a lot of time trying to prevent disaster striking people. So, as is common in Square's games, the protagonists are selfless heroes trying to make the world a better place, regardless of what timeline they are in, because they believe it is the right thing to do, regardless of the sacrifices they have to make. Final Fantasy XIII-2 is thus not a mere story for entertainment, but a parable that seeks to impart a moral viewpoint to its audience. To me, this is high art and makes the story a worthy 10. Graphics. The environments are gorgeous. Final Fantasy XIII-2 has some of the best graphics I've ever seen in a game, and I honestly can't tell the difference between the look of the characters in FMVs and the regular gameplay, which is a testament to the level of polish. Sound design. I expect all the classic Final Fantasy sounds to be present in a Final Fantasy game, and I was not disappointed. And all the new sounds felt appropriate to the world and situation, and I never noticed anything that sounded out of place. Every line of dialogue has voiceover, and the actors' lines never feel forced or out of place. I noticed no problems in this area. Music. On the other hand, the music is not bad, but not what I've come to expect from a Final Fantasy game. Many of the tracks just don't feel Final Fantasy to me. I mean, at one point I jumped onto a red chocobo and death metal started playing. If I closed my eyes during some of the levels, I'd be expecting to open them to a Persona game. Maybe that's my fault for having certain expectations in a Final Fantasy game, but Nobuo Uematsu's lack of presence is highly noticeable in this title. At least when he was handling music, the games had consistent themes between them, even if the musical genres changed slightly. I just don't think pop music and death metal belong in a Final Fantasy game. I expect something more orchestral. Control. I never felt I had too much trouble controlling my avatar around the map. Also, the ability to jump off and over obstacles was very helpful and needed for a title like this, given some of the zones are fairly large, and it's useful to be able to take a shortcut by jumping off a hill you've climbed, rather than walk all the way down it again. Depth. I felt that Paradigm Shift was invented to make Final Fantasy XIII an intro-level RPG, and I feel it's the same goal for XIII-2. For an experienced gamer like myself, I'd rather micromanage my party, and Paradigm doesn't allow me to do that. Since you can only control one character at a time, you're at the whim of what the AI wants your other three characters to do. And I have a suspicion that sometimes the AI is not that smart. For example, the most intelligent thing for your medic to do is use raise when someone falls, but that isn't what it always does. It will occasionally go several turns spamming cure on itself or other party members before it finally reses the dude who is supposed to be tanking for the party. I've noticed some reviewers say they managed to play the game without ever doing a single battle where they manually chose the abilities they used. I think those reviewers must have been playing on easy mode. I played on normal, and there are some monsters who demand micromanaging at least one of your characters as a saboteur, because the auto for saboteurs is pretty stupid. It doesn't appear to acknowledge an enemy has buffed itself with everything in the game, and that you need to spam Dispel. Instead, it wants to prioritize Poison or D-Shell when the most effective thing to do is spam Dispel, and let your offensive dudes wail on the monster. So there is some depth to the system, although it's not obvious in the first few hours of gameplay, which I do think is a problem. The learning curve isn't sharp enough in the game, and that leads to boring battles at the most crucial phase, the beginning. I also believe that the Auto Commands AI could have done for some more fine-tuning during the playtest phase of the game's development. I've gotten Noel to level 60 in Commando, but over half the time Auto just wants to spam attack, regardless of how better off he'd be using one of the dozens of abilities he's learned. That just doesn't make much sense. If Square Enix's goal was to make a combat system that was like watching a Michael Bay movie, then I believe they have achieved that, but they still haven't struck the correct balance between movie and game. I don't like it when what I want my characters to do in order to efficiently win the battles is not what they do, and this is my disconnect with the paradigm system. I can only control one character at a time, and I have no way to issue commands to other party members so they will do what I need them to do when I want them to do it. It seems funny when I think about it, but the thing I hate the most about Final Fantasy XIII-2 is the lack of choices I can make during combat, which is funny because the rest of Final Fantasy XIII-2 is all about the choices you make impacting the flow of the narrative and what kind of story you get. Innovation. Final Fantasy XIII-2 isn't a bad game, but I'm not in love with it. I'm trying to digest why, and I'm leaning to the combat system. Now, since Final Fantasy XIII's claim to fame was the paradigm system, for this section I'll simply focus on the monster pet system that has been plugged into it in Final Fantasy XIII-2. To be frank, I don't like how it's been implemented. I'm so tired of games that let me have a party of like 20 people, but I can only take 3 of them into battle with me at any one time. Also, the fusion system is overly complicated, and certain monsters won't fuse with others. 20 hours into the game, and I'm still using the same medic monster from the start, because his abilities won't fuse into any other medics I've found. What the hell is up with that? My initial impression of the time traveling is that it wasn't what I was hoping for. Something like Chrono Trigger, where you were able to travel the entire world each time you jump through time and explore it. Instead, each time period is an isolated area that may or may not have anything to do with an area you were previously at. In that regard, it's not as charming as moving through time in Chrono Trigger, where you'd see the continent change with the passage of time, and civilizations rise and fall. That was cool. Instead, 13-2's time traveling feels more like hopping planets in Kingdom Hearts. The layout even looks the same. User friendliness. In contrast to the bulk of decisions your characters make during combat being automated, the character development system requires a lot of micromanaging. Since there is no automatic leveling up, you need to spend points to advance your character. Problem is you tend to earn enough points to advance after every 2 battles. So you have the choice of either putting off upgrading for a while and then doing it all in one go after you've saved up several thousand points, or stop what you were doing every 2 battles and spend 1 point per character. Either way, it offends my design sensibilities because of the first option, your characters don't advance when they could, meaning battles remain the same difficulty level. And with the later option, you're constantly pausing the game to move the characters 1 beat down their career paths. This system makes me long for the days when my Final Fantasy characters leveled up automatically without needing my permission to do so. And it's unfortunate that there is no option to have the game automatically spend points toward one paradigm path. For example, set Noel to upgrade his Commando as points become available, and Sarah to upgrade Ravager. Instead, you have to manually upgrade the character down the linear development paths of a paradigm. And that is annoying because it involves loading the damn screens and moving through screens, and it just takes too long to do a relatively minor thing. By themselves, these screens don't take too long to open and close, but when you are opening and closing screens every other battle, it really becomes stupidly repetitive and detracts from the immersion, and I really hate it. I don't like this aspect of the game, and after 20 hours, it really got on my nerves. So my biggest complaint is that someone at Square Enix didn't take a little bit of time to make some code where you could have a character set to advance one paradigm automatically. It would have made a world of difference to the flow of the gameplay without these constant, annoying interruptions. Polish. I will say I'm rather impressed with the load times. I was previously playing Dragon Age 2, where the load times really got on my nerves when the game was just loading a small generic cavern. The game apparently only has 1 cavern level, and the loading just populates it with monsters. At least that's what I hope it's doing, is sit there for 2-3 minutes waiting to play. By contrast, a zone in Final Fantasy XIII-2 usually loads in 30 seconds, and that's including any movies that may be triggered as soon as you hop into the zone. I also haven't noticed any characters wigging in and out of reality during cutscenes, so the game does seem to be well programmed and playtested. Fun factor. There are some boring parts of the game. Namely, the first few dozen levels in a paradigm don't provide that many useful abilities, and this makes combat feel rather like spamming attack on everything, except you aren't, because the game is making the decisions for you. All you have to do is remember to shift to Sentinel before a boss delivers a hard blow, and then shift back to your offensive rolls, and toss a potion and you'll beat the first few bosses with ease. I also don't like the inclusion of the pseudo QuickTime event fighting game combinations into the combat system, only because they kind of come at you out of nowhere. Unlike Kingdom Hearts 2, they aren't a regular part of combat in the game, usually just coming up in boss battles. So when they do appear, they often catch you by surprise, and as you weren't expecting them, you don't always have enough time to press the complex sequence of buttons. Combat does get awfully repetitive, and most battles just require you to sit there spamming auto. There are rare monsters which appear and are more challenging to defeat, but they don't come up often enough to break up the monotonous gameplay. There are also some occasions you need to solve puzzles to progress, and while I didn't find any of them particularly challenging, they did feel to slow down the gameplay and break the pace, which I thought was out of place since the rest of the gameplay is focused on being very cinematic.
Or am I wrong?
With all of that said, my final score for Final Fantasy XIII-2 is 75 out of 100, making it an above average game, but not perfect. It has flaws, but if you can look past them, you'll find a pretty decent game that is worth your purchase if you enjoyed Final Fantasy XIII. Well guys, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It took me a bit of time to really reflect and think about the game and what various parts of it mean to me, whether I think they're done good or bad, and so forth. And if you guys have any thoughts, about my system, if you think it could be improved perhaps, just give me a comment below in the comment section of this video. Or you can send me a personal message on my channel, the RPG Fanatic, my username. Yeah, so hope you guys will enjoy other episodes that I've created. And have fun gaming, guys.